In this talk, I want to address three perspectives on self-determination. And well, it's more of a background talk just to reflect on what it means to decide for yourself what to do. Yeah, so that's the definition. I will use it in a very general sense. So the term self-determination, it's used in self-determination theory and psychology, of course. And it's also typically seen as one of the two necessary conditions, or necessary and sufficient together often, of free will. So most philosophers think that we either do or do not need to have alternative possibilities in order to be free, but at least we have to self-determine what we do. So a good example here is if you would encounter a bear in the woods, for example, and you feel fear, and then it might be the case that just your body decides for you. So you either freeze or you fight or you flee, but that's not really something that you determine for yourself. You kind of depend on the things that your biology decides for you. So most people would say, well, you have, in this case, there are alternative possibilities, but it's not really up to you. If you decide to, well, at least if you're not you don't have experience with bears, if you're very good at making a decision in this case, that's possible too. But for most people, if they're extremely afraid and they don't really know what to do, then the response is very low level, and there are maybe alternative possibilities, but it's not up to you what will happen. So most people think that self-determination, at least in some sense, has to do with consciousness, with conscious decisions. And that's also what experimental philosophy, for example, shows. So but these, yeah, as I said, there are a lot of different things at play when we talk about self-determination. It's connected to autonomy, to making your own rules and acting on the basis of them, to authenticity, to becoming who you truly are. And I don't want to give a very definite definition of either of these. I just want to reflect on different views that have been discussed in the literature, mainly in relation to free will, and just give you some background on which questions and which arguments may play a role here, and how I think it is to an important extent related to personality growth and to how we think about personality growth. But I kind of want to leave it up to you to reflect on these connections and give you some different perspectives to think about. One way we could think about self-determination is freedom from influence. So self-determination means that you're not being caused by anything to do what you do, that you're deciding completely for yourself, like a lone wolf perspective on free will. And often this perspective on self-determination, as I said, the condition for free will, so self-determination is what we're talking about here specifically. Often the idea is that libertarians, so people who think that free will is not compatible with determinism, so that we need to have alternative possibilities for free will, sometimes it is thought of those views that these people actually defend a view of self-determination in which there's absolutely no causation. They just decide out of nowhere what to do, or for people to self-determine what they do, they have to decide out of nowhere. They cannot take anything into account. They cannot be influenced by anything. But in my view, this is definitely not what libertarians want to defend when they talk about self-determination. The thing they want to defend is that you have to have choice. So you have to have alternatives. But that doesn't mean that these alternatives you choose from, that this choice has to be a blind choice, because that's what choosing without any grounds or without any influence would amount to. So I think this is a mistaken interpretation of libertarians' views, because it would amount to blind picking. It wouldn't have anything to do with deciding in which direction your life is going. So to just give an example, imagine that you can choose from 3 jobs. You get 3 jobs offers, and the ultimate self-determination in this view as freedom from influence would be that you just choose whichever pops to mind first or whatever. But of course, in order to really make a self-determinant choice, a choice that you're really behind, that you want, that involves the way you want to live your life, then you have to be influenced by certain factors. So you have to respond to the advantages of one job over the other, whether you have to move, whether you can travel abroad, what the pay is, for example. So if you don't take into account any of these factors, that doesn't have anything to do with self-determination. There has to be some intelligence, some reasons responsiveness at least. And this is also what libertarians say. So actually, I think this view of self-determination as freedom from influence is more of a straw man. So it's more often used as a bad way of interpreting libertarian views of free will and then criticizing it in a very easy way. But in general, I don't think that there's any philosopher who would say, well, decisions that come completely out of nowhere are the self-determined decisions. What they are mainly emphasizing is that the relationship between the reasons, so for example, the advantages of one job over another, that you respond to them intelligently. So you're not just like a stone rolling off the hill because it's kicked or something like that. But there's a different kind of causation. There's a different kind of relationship between the reasons and between the things that speak in favor of a certain job and the decision you actually make. So I think that's the view that libertarians actually want to defend. And I think this view of self-determination is one that we should just not take very seriously. That's the first view, just to get it out of the way. And the second view of self-determination, I think this is a view that is supported actually by a lot of people, by a lot of philosophers, and I think it's central in a lot of psychological theories as well. And that's the idea of self-determination as internal coherence. So I think one of the most influential philosophers in this way of thinking about self-determination is Harry Frankfurt. And Harry Frankfurt has argued in the 70s for this idea of the personhood compared to just being a wanton, is that we do not just act on our desires or for a person to self-determine what she does. She doesn't just act on her desires or the things she wants to do, but she acts on those desires that she wants to be that she wants to be her intentions, that she wants to have. So I put up some pictures about like stopping smoking or training for a marathon, for example. So the idea is I can have all these desires. So I can have the desire to smoke. I can have the desire to have a nice evening with my friends smoking cigarettes. I can have the desire not to have unhealthy lungs. And I can have the desire to have a very good fitness and to be able to run a marathon, for example. And the question for Harry Frankfurt is, which of those first order desires do I want to be my intention? Which of those do I agree with? Do I endorse? And if I'm able to make this movement, so to reflect on these first order desires and to actually act on those first order desires that I want to be my desires, then I self-determine what to do. And there's been criticism on Frankfurt's view, and he has developed his view in different ways, and it's been developed in many different directions. But in general, the idea is that self-determination has to do with some sort of internal coherence. So there has to be a coherence between my desires and my actions and my intentions and something that's more higher level, that speaks for me as an agent, that I take to be who I truly am, so to say. And whether you talk about those as higher order intentions or perhaps values or commitments, that doesn't really matter that much. It's really about that you as an agent are some sort of integrated whole. And this is also the way in which, for example, Ryan and Deasy in the self-determination theory think about that I have to identify with the goals that I act from and that I have to endorse them. So this is really, I think, a very widespread idea of what self-determination is, and both in psychology and philosophy. And so as I already said, the general idea is motivation, so your lower order motivation should cohere with your values and commitments and cares. And then the deep or true self has authorized the action. So that's kind of the general idea. And I think this is also the perhaps view of self-determination or personality growth that you may have been talking about during the workshop as well. But I want to criticize, or at least critically reflect on this proposal. So of course I'm not trying to give like an argument against this view or say that this view is useless or something like that. But I do want to offer some alternative perspective to this view in which the relationship between the agent and the external world plays a more central role. And that's mainly based on a criticism. Well, the criticism has been given by more philosophers, but Susan Wolf has been one of the people who criticized Frankfurt's account. So she gives this example of Yo-Yo, or Jojo, however you want to pronounce it. And Jojo is the son of Joe. And Joe is an evil dictator who, has done a lot of bad things and has, of course, raised his son Jojo in a way that's really in line with all these bad things and with being a dictator and hurting people and things like that. And you could say that Jojo has been manipulated by his father or brainwashed or whatever term you want to use to have just a vicious character, to not be a very good person and to make very good decisions. And I think in that sense, so Susan Wolf really connects it to more responsibility as well. So it's but also to freedom. So the idea is that if you're manipulated or brainwashed in such a way that you're not able to reflect on the goodness of your values and commitments in a sound way, that you're still not really truly free and you're not truly morally responsible for what you do. So this is a criticism of views like Frankfurt's and the view that's also central in the self-determination theory, that internal coherence is sufficient, because we could be, so Joe could be and Jojo could be completely internally coherent. They can have values and commitments and cares that are completely in line with all the things they do and with their desires. But still there is a sense in which they don't really have the ability to do the right thing or to become a virtuous person. So there is a strong limitation on their freedom and especially their moral responsibility as well. That there's something off with the way they are. And Susan Wolf calls this sanity. So she says, for a person to determine for herself what to do, so to talk about self-determination, a person should be sane. And in her view, that means that the person should have the ability to do the right thing for the right reasons. She should be able to, not just do bad things, but also to have some understanding of what is really good and what is really the right thing to do. Yeah, and I think this is an interesting way to think about self-determination. But one of the problems with this view is, so Susan Wolf has defended this view, but some other people, so Fischer and Ravisa, for example, have also defended more reason-responsive views. So what matters is not so much internal integration, but your connection with the outer world. So being able to reflect on what the world is like, what's good to do given what the world is like. But in general, they don't make explicit their view of what reasons are. So I talked about this in the other talk as well. I don't know in which order you're going to watch it, but I think one of the central issues that are interesting in relation to self-determination and in relation to free will is, that we don't really have a very good idea of what reasons are and what it means to act for good reasons. So that's what I want to focus on in the second part of this talk. So what are reasons for actions and what are right reasons? And as I see it, or I'm not the only one who sees it like that, but the actual reasons for which we act, so motivating reasons, are not just causes or influences, but these are the things that speak in favor or justify an action. So these are the things that we take to make the action something that is good to do. And I think this is very much in line with how we normally go about giving and asking for reasons. So if someone asks us, why did you do what you do? We ask for something that justifies or that speaks in favor of the action. So I think, in my view, one of the important things that we have to do is take into account how we use reasons in daily life and how if we, especially if we want to research it in psychology, for example, that we do not move too far away from how these concepts or how these concepts, I think, are used in our day-to-day interaction. So there are a couple of proposals of what reasons are. So motivating reasons, reasons for actions, what they are. And one view that's been accepted by a lot of people and quite a common view among philosophers for a long time has been the idea that reasons, so motivating reasons for actions, are very broadly put things in our head. So they are beliefs, for example, or desires, or I think values, cares, things like that. So if I want to know what motivated a person to do what they do, I should ask what their beliefs and desires are. And there's been a lot of criticism of this view, and I think rightly so, because again, when we normally interact and ask people about reasons and why they did what they did, then beliefs, especially beliefs, are more often used as an excuse. So, for example, if I throw away something that was in the fridge, because I thought it was old and that we had to get rid of it, and my friend tells me, well, that's not, that was my dinner for tomorrow night or something like that, then my answer would be, oh, I thought it was dinner from 5 days ago that we forgot to throw out. So we use beliefs and thoughts more as an excuse when we make mistakes, but what we actually take to justify actions are things in the world. So what would justify my action of throwing away the food in the fridge would be that it's actually old, that it's truly not suitable for eating anymore. So this insight that things that actually justify actions, that these are not things in our heads, but in first instance things in the world, has become quite popular. So the idea is that reasons, motivating reasons, are facts. So one fact that could motivate my action would be that someone is drowning, for example, or that the food is actually old, or that it's raining, or something like that. But again, if we think about what really justifies our actions, facts are not sufficient either. So this is how we normally talk about it, but that's because we presuppose something else. So the example of rain, but also the example of the person drowning are very clear examples to explain this with. So if someone asks me, why did you jump in the water? And I say, well, this person was drowning, we normally accept this as an answer. But again, that's only because there's this implicit assumption that saving a person is a good thing to do, or that saving a person is a good thing to do, and that saving the person is in fact what justifies jumping into the water. So it's not so much that the person is drowning, but that you want to prevent something, namely that the person is actually drowning. And the same holds with the rain, for example. If someone would ask me, why did you bring an umbrella? And I say, because it's raining. We all understand that what you actually mean is that you want to stay dry, or that you want to arrive at your important meeting dry. But so in that sense, we answer in terms of facts, but that's because we presuppose that this fact supports that we have to respond to this fact in a certain way in order to perform an action at a higher level of description, so to say. So that's the view that I want to defend and use in the remainder of this talk, that what actually justifies and speaks in favor of a more specific action, so for example jumping in the water or bringing an umbrella, is an action at a higher level of description. So the action at a higher level of description is, for example, saving someone, or going to the meeting without wet hair and makeup all over your face, for example. So I use this view of Wolff and of Fischer and Visa as well, that reason's responsiveness, or the ability to act for good reasons, means the ability to act for or in light of actions that are good at the highest level of description. So that's the general idea. And this view is very much in line with the work of Elizabeth Anscombe. And Elizabeth Anscombe is a British philosopher, and she is part of the Wartime Quartet. So together with Iris Murdoch and Philippa Foot and Mary Mitchley, they were 4 women who had the opportunity during the Second World War to develop their philosophies more and to really cooperate and really this kind of what I've been emphasizing, to make philosophy more about or more in connection to and relevant for daily life. And she has a very interesting perspective on action that has influenced my work quite a lot. And her idea is that actions are not just outputs of all kinds of psychological processes, so for example, beliefs or responding to facts even, but actions have a rational structure in themselves, so they have an inherent rational structure. As I said, I jump into the water in order to save someone from drowning. So there's this hierarchy in what I'm doing. And as she says, and many people have developed her view in recent years as well. So for one example is Michael Thompson. And the general idea is that every time I act, well, especially Michael Thompson really defends this idea strongly, even if I just move my arm up, there is a hierarchy of movement. So there is one thing that we do in order to do something else. And at the highest level of description, the action is connected to the good. And then it's important to realize it's not about the ethical good. So it's not so much about the virtuous way of thinking of goodness necessarily. Because, of course, people can also act for bad intentions and they can do bad things. But the important thing in this theory is that the person acting as such does think of the action itself as good for him or herself in a certain way. So either useful or pleasant or good in the way that it leads to the good life. So to go back to the example of Joe and Jojo, well, we would say that their actions are directed at something bad, but they, of course, think that they are doing something good. So they think, well, it's important that I stay in power and that everybody listens to me. And in order to achieve this, I have to torture people, something like that. Anscombe actually uses an example of Nazis, of course. But the idea is that goodness is really goodness from the perspective of the agent itself. And in that sense, every action is in some sense aimed at the good in your perspective on what the good is. Thirdly, we have practical knowledge of our actions. So we have this distinct first personal perspective on what we are doing and why we are doing it. To give an example, if I walk to the supermarket and my neighbor comes from the other side and this person asks, what are you doing? I don't have to reflect on my mental states or look at my environment or look at my body to be able to answer the question, I'm walking to the supermarket. This is just something I know directly. And I think maybe the most important point for today, or what I want to emphasize, is that actions take place in the world. So sometimes the tendency is this picture of actions as just output, and this idea of reasons as facts and reasons as beliefs, desire states, tend to sometimes ignore a little bit, or at least emphasize less, that in order to be actually able to act, the world has to be a certain way. So for me to be able to walk to the supermarket, there has to be a supermarket, there has to be a sidewalk, all these kinds of things. And I think that's an important thing that we have to take into account when we talk about action, and also about self-determination and perhaps even personality growth, depending on your definition of personality growth. So a good way to illustrate Anscombe's view is with the movie The Shawshank Redemption. So I hope you've already seen this movie, and if you still want to see it, then maybe don't listen to this part because it's a major spoiler. But in this movie, Andy is in jail, and I think, as far as I remember, he is innocent, or at least that's the impression we get as the people watching the movie. And he's being like a perfect inmate, so he's helping everyone, he's being kind, he's not making any fights and stuff like that. But near the end of the movie, it becomes clear that all this time he has been digging this tunnel to escape from prison. And, well, he didn't have any sophisticated tools, of course, so it took him a very long time. It's not clear how long, but at least a very long time. And this is, I think, a very nice example to show that every time he was cutting this digging part of this tunnel, he was already working on escaping. So in some sense, if someone would ask, well, he wouldn't answer, of course, in this case, but imagine that another inmate would ask, what are you doing? Then he could say, I'm digging a tunnel, but also I'm escaping, or I'm trying to escape. So this is a good way to see how all the small things we do often are part of something much bigger. And that's the message of Anscombe that we, I think, should take seriously. And I think in general, if we talk about self-determination, like true self-determination, we go one step further than just action. We tend to think, and also if we talk about personality growth and freedom, which is also clear from Susan Wolf's criticism of Frankfurt, for example, we tend to think that it's more than just acting on your intentions or the things that you personally want to do. It's also about truly doing the thing that is good. So one of the things that we can learn from breakups or bad things happening to us is that we get our priorities straight, more or less, so that we get an idea of what is truly important to us and what's truly important in general. So what is a good way to lead your life. So it always, even though in Anscombe's specific action theory, it doesn't have this moral dimension, that's something that she's very clear about. I think if we want to make distinctions between actions that we just do and that we don't take to be a sign of personality growth and actions that we do take to be a sign of personality growth, I think there is this dimension of whether it's actually good or whether it's actually contributing to well-being or to leading a good life. So I think an interesting, on the basis of this action theory, we can make an interesting move towards what it would mean to self-determine what you do in a slightly different way than self-determination theory and Harry Frankfurt define it, because it's more about integrating what is actually good to do, but also kind of integrating your actions and decisions with the world as it is, which has to do with this point that actions take place in the world. So, well, that's Aristotle, so virtues. I think this is... So Anscombe has been influenced by Aristotle quite strongly too. So there's also this idea of moving towards flourishing, the good being what determines all the other things you do. And what I think ultimate self-determination would come down to when we take this perspective on reasons and on action is that we have to reflect on these hierarchical structures that we are creating in our lives. So one of the things that would follow from this theory of action is that if we, this picture, the last picture is meant to capture friendship. And if, for example, I would want to celebrate my friendship with someone, I can organize a dinner party and then I can make a curry, and then the first most basic thing to do would be to cut an onion. And the nice thing about this picture of self-determination is that already at the moment that I'm cutting an onion, I'm already in the business of celebrating or nourishing my friendship. So that's kind of the idea, that all these specific small actions already mean something on a higher level of description. And then, of course, the challenge for true self-determination or flourishing or personality growth is that these higher levels are things that I really think are good, but also, that's something that you can reflect on and maybe disagree with. But also are truly good. So I think friendship is very important, and I think so I think that's a very good value to have, and it's good that caring about friendship determines that I do things in light of friendship. But I think it's also interesting that we can constantly ask this why or how question. So the idea is that I value friendship, and then I can ask myself why, I can cut an onion, and then I can ask myself, why am I cutting an onion? And I can also ask myself, okay, I care about friendship, how am I going to implement it? And this looks like a very deliberate, over-intellectualized picture of action, but the fascinating thing is that we often do these things automatically. So I just care about my friends, and when one of my friends sends me a text that she had a very difficult day, I kind of automatically start typing. So already in these small finger movements, there is my expression of friendship. So we definitely shouldn't think of this as a very conscious, deliberate thing, but a structure that's always there in our lives and that we can reflect on when necessary. So we can ask questions like, why friendship? Maybe honesty is more important in this case, or maybe honesty is important for friendship. Why should I cook dinner now? Maybe I should do something else. Maybe we should just go for a walk or something. Why with these people? And ultimately, the question is, what is a good life? So ultimately, what should determine our specific actions is, how do we want to live our lives, and how does this concretely lead to specific actions? So yeah, what I find really interesting about this perspective is, on the one hand, you could argue for this perspective more in line with Frankfurt. So you could say, well, there's internal coherence within the action, not so much in my psychological states, but within what I'm doing, so what I'm actually producing in the world. But you could also say, as I've been emphasizing a bit more in relation to Susan Wolf, the ultimate self-determined person also has a very good grasp of what a good life is. The person is not just using her own perspective, but understands what a good life is. And I think this is an interesting challenge and an interesting question that we need to reflect on, also in relationship to personality growth. Who gets to decide what it means, what a grown person is? So is that a person that has certain virtues, or is it a person that has made certain decisions about which virtues he cares about? So I think there's an interesting tension, or at least question here that we can reflect on. And what I also think is very interesting is that what kind of follows from this view, and what actually follows from all views on reasons as facts, but also reasons as higher level actions, is that in order to be a self-determined person, or in order to be a flourishing person, or to be a grown person, it also requires that you're really in tune with the world as it is. So in this example of friendship, I can decide for myself, okay, I want to organize a dinner party with 5 of my best friends, and I want to prepare all the food and blah, blah, and I've organized all of this. And then when one of my friends calls me up and says, well, my relationship just ended, or something else bad happened to me. And then the question always is, all right, so what, given this situation and what's happening, what is the right response? What does it mean to be a friend? Does it mean to just go on with my dinner party, or does it mean that I should cancel it and do something with this person alone instead? So what I really like about this proposal is that it really emphasizes that for us to make decisions by ourselves, and decisions that are in line with our reasons and our values, we cannot ignore the world. We have to take the world seriously and take the facts seriously, and constantly reflect on what in this world it means to express friendship, or be courageous, or be honest.
So welcome back, and obviously thank you very much, Lieke, for being with us.
Yes.
if we have some comments, questions regarding the talk, who would like to start? Okay, Aku?
Thanks for the talk. I found it very interesting. I I also read a few weeks ago the paper that you published on consciousness and control, looking at what Shepard says and all that. But let's put that aside. Uh, I think this is an interesting project that you're doing. So I have a question and a recommendation.
Okay.
So it's more like a philosophical issue, not that doesn't have to do that much with self I mean with personality growth. But the philosophical issue is this: as you can imagine, what comes from the other side, the criticism that's going to come from the other side is, well, if reasons have this a special feature that they are not just things in your head, uh, how do we process them and how do they fit into the naturalistic picture of the world? And this is a worry that a number of philosophers working after Anscombe and inside her legacy have had. So the Finnish philosopher George Henry Crom Wright, I'm going to send you a couple of links on that. He developed this idea quite extensively, and he ended up thinking that reasons are not in fact facts in this, let's say, naturalistic sense at all, because he thought that reasons have, because they justify actions, they can't have a simple causal structure. So they have to be something else. But he was never able to explicate what they really were. So they were some sort of logical facts in some sort of logical space. They had to be public because they couldn't be private. They had to be public, but at the same time, there was no way to explicate how they relate to, let's say, kind of causal models on psychology or things like that. So they exist in their own realm. And this is going to be the criticism, I think. People are going to, especially from the causal theory of thinking, people are going to say, well, it's nice that you have these reasons, but how can we put them inside our, let's say, kind of roughly naturalistic picture of the world and our naturalistic psychology without creating a kind of world of reasons which somehow hovers beyond our psychology. So I think this is a more philosophical issue,
Yeah.
rather than having to do with personality growth. But I think this will be the criticism. So I'm going to put a link into the chat where there's a recent paper on what von Wright says about reasons. So that might be useful because he's written a bunch of books. The most famous one is called Explanation and Understanding from 1971. But there are a number of others because he also connects this with the free will issue. So he looks at the role of reasons in this whole bigger picture. But in order to kind of develop this view, I think there's a lot of work, especially in this context around von Wright, that deals with these same kinds of issues that you're dealing with here. So I think this is, well, more of a question. So how would you respond to this kind of worry?
Yeah. So to be honest, I always feel like, but that's a bit of a negative response maybe, but I always feel like naturalism being an argument is like you're just stuck in your world image and you don't want to accept that it cannot explain something. And then you're just saying, oh,
That's
but
fair.
naturalism. I'm like, come on. I mean, what even is naturalism, right? Ask Hans. Hans has a lot of ideas about what naturalism is or what it not is. But okay, so a different answer would be, so I wrote a Dutch book on free will and reasons and stuff like that. And in that book, I use Michael Thompson's work. So I use this idea that also if we want to make sense of like photosynthesis, we also need to have this final causation. So even in a lot of cases in the natural world, I think a convincing case can be made that we cannot make do with efficient causation alone. We have to accept that there are means and structures in the biological world as well. And I think the arguments from like naturalists that only accept efficient causation, that they kind of presuppose that this structure is there in their reasoning. So that's kind of how I built from these kinds of means end structures to the means end structures that are actions. So I agree that in the end, a lot of questions remain open, and that a lot of like very metaphysical work should be done. But yeah, I also think that it's like a natural extension of how we think about, or how biological processes can be explained. But thank you very much for your literature.
Yeah, so just to continue that on that point a little bit. So I agree with you that kind of appealing to naturalism as a whole, it's not a very good argument. But I think the sting of the criticism is a bit more precise than that. It's not just in that implication of naturalism, but it's the implication. I think the point of the criticism is that the reasons, whatever those reasons are, they have to be processed somehow, and they have to be represented somehow, and they have to be somehow part of our cognitive system. And so saying that they are something, if they're just facts, that doesn't seem to have the kind of justificatory force. Or then what you mean is that the justification of an action is somehow separate from the motivating reason. Because it seems that in order for the reason to be something that moves me, it can't be just a fact. It has to be something that goes through my system, and I give it a certain kind of value and things like that. And that's a cognitive process, right? So you have to have that inside. You have to put in that. So there has to be a connection there. And again. Yeah, and I guess. Oh yes.
Yes, so I wouldn't argue that reasons are facts, because I think so. Following Anskamp and this whole final causation story, only in light of certain ends do certain things in the environment, does certain information become relevant for what you're doing. Like an obstacle is only an obstacle in light of your end, and something is only useful in light of your end. So I would say that. I would follow, for example, Anton Ford has this paper on what's in front of your nose. And in that paper, he connects this practical syllogism. So from like a more general action at a higher level of description to a more specific action by saying that the minor premise is like the information that's out there in the world. So these facts and this information become part of the practical reasoning of and the means and structure of the action. So I don't want to say that facts aren't reasons at all, because I think that's just so strongly related to our common way of talking about these things that it would just become a technical term that's kind of useless, or at least that's so far out of line with the normal way we talk about it. But I wouldn't say that facts in themselves justify actions, because you have to have the structure. So in that sense, I don't know whether that answers your worry. Sometimes I'm not completely sure.
So I guess
it's part of the reasoning.
Yeah, just one thing. So I guess the worry is that you can say that certain facts or certain reasons justify some of my actions, but that doesn't mean that that's the actual kind of process through which I came to act. So I think this is a problem that von Wright also recognizes, that of course the fact that there's someone drowning, that provides a justification for me to do certain things like jump into the water or save the person. But the fact that this justificatory relationship between my action and the fact obtains doesn't mean that is the process through which I came to do that. So it seems to me that we have to make some sort of a distinction between motivating reasons and justificatory reasons, because those don't necessarily coincide. And by providing a justification for some action doesn't necessarily mean that you've said anything about why I did it. So.
Yeah, but then I would still say that the psychological processes enable me to act for that reason instead of replacing the reason. So I think I just see like rational action and stuff like that, more as like an external or something that's taking place in the world and that we like participate in. But if we don't respond to the facts, then it's just we will not reach our ends, right? So it's we have to relate to the world in a certain way. So I agree. I might have to think about that more, but I don't. Yeah, I'm not that. I don't see what the alternative would be. Maybe that's the best response, because I think our psychology enables us to act for reasons, but it doesn't replace the facts. But thanks. It's interesting point. So are there other questions or comments?
Yes, if there's no one now. I like the whole idea of connecting actions to the good, like acting for some higher purpose, but then sort of raises the question, what about like acts out of sheer evil? Like when you look at Christian theology, like does Lucifer act, does the devil act, or just really evil people, do they not count as actions if they're just evil for evil's sake, if that exists? And also another thing, like the example of the friendship, the dinner, got me thinking. Sure, I want to be a good friend. I want to have dinner. I want to like listen to people after breakups. But sometimes we act for like reasons like, let it be, like I don't care anymore. I just can't do it right now. I don't have the energy. I don't have the patience. Now I want to do something else. Just want to look at TV, just chill, do nothing. Does these that count as actions then as well on this account? Or are they oriented towards some other good, maybe?
Yeah, so thanks. Interesting point. So I would think, but that's, yeah, maybe that's also like an endless discussion, but I would think that if someone acts for evil, just for being evil, that this person still sees something attractive in doing so, right? Otherwise, what would the motivation be? So that would be like my response. Like, so what I find really interesting about this account is that on the one hand, you have, for example, Susan Wolf in the moral responsibility debate, who's saying, well, you have to be able to act for good reasons to be morally responsible. And on the other hand, people say, well, you just have to be able to act for reasons, whatever, or you have to be reasons responsible. Well, that's also often connected with the quality of reasons. But what I find really interesting about this approach is that on the one hand, you can say, well, it's just your own means and structure. And in order to act for your end, you have to respond to the information in the right way, or otherwise you will be making mistakes and you're not reaching your end. And then you can simply say, well, it doesn't have to be good overall. Maybe you could say, well, for someone to really like flourish, for example, you should be able to act for the right reasons, like Susan Wolf says. But you could also say, on the other hand, that it's more about what your own ends are. And at least there's an interesting tension there. And there's also an interesting discussion about, what those good reasons are supposed to be. And then if it's really personal, then you could say, well, the person acting for pure evil does see something good for him or herself, at least in the action. Otherwise, she wouldn't be motivated to do it. So I think that would be my response. And I think the answer to the second question would be more or less the same, because again, I don't understand why I give this example, actually, because I don't like cooking at all, and I don't like cooking for a large group either. So it's not something I would do to show my friendship to people. I would do something else. So, I mean, of course, you can take into account like your own characteristics to reflect on how you would be the kind of person to show your friendship to certain people. And you can also sometimes decide that it's better for you or better overall to not be constantly concerned with your friendships, but just do something to relax. And that would still have this not doing anything or relaxing still has a desirability characterization. So it still has something that for you means like, this is the good life for me. Sometimes have certain days on which I don't do anything and I'm not concerned with like world problems. So I think that would perfectly fit into the scheme. But then again, I would think that it depends on the context, right? As well.
But so, if I may briefly follow up, isn't there like multiple goods playing, like my friendship good and like my egotistical good, so to say, or my own well-being good, maybe?
Yeah.
So, like, how do you like weigh these off? Is there like an overarching good, like how do you decide which one wins, or which action you should do, or which one is the right action?
Yeah, so I think that would be an ethical question, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the Enskamp would say then if we ask further why questions, we end up in ethics. And if we only talk about intentional actions, you only talk about your own desirability characterizations. But I think that's one of the most interesting topics of discussion, because at some point you could say, well, an evil dictator doing like everything that's in line with his or her desirability characterizations, you might still say, well, this person is not flourishing because this person is not acting for things that we find valuable or that this person should find valuable. But on the other hand, so I don't know. I have my intuitions tend to change on those, or tends to also differ depending on whether you talk about self-determination or flourishing, for example. But it's in the end, if you talk about like acting for your own reasons, you could argue that self-determination only means that you have decided for yourself what you think is desirable and what you think the good life is. And as long as you're able to do all these things that support the way you see the good life, then you're self-determined. But yeah, I don't know what your intuitions are. I always feel like if it's just intuitions, I have a hard time making up my mind, but I don't know.
Yeah, me too. So maybe move to the next question. Yeah.
I'll have something. Following on a little bit from what you're just saying about about self-determination. So my question was about the ideas that you were sketching toward the end about self-determination, drawing on work from Anscombe and Thompson. I'm wondering if the kind of more sophisticated account of self-determined action that you get there, were you thinking that it somehow evaded the worry from Wolf for Frankfurt's account? Like, could we not have someone who, can you not get the dictator example, the Jojo dictator example, where Jojo, satisfies your ideas about self-determination, and yet they were sort of subject to manipulation?
Yeah, so thank you. That's an interesting point. So I think with this approach, you could go either way. So you could say, in this approach, you necessarily have to have some contact with what the world is actually like, because otherwise you're not able to act on your end. So you have to, for example, if you think, oh, I want my I'm being evil because, or I'm killing people because I want my people to be happy, the people I rule over, and all these people are only afraid because you kill people randomly, then you're not succeeding in your end. So then you could objectively say that you're failing to act on your ends because you're not paying attention to what the world is really like. But of course, you could also say, well, this evil dictator has the end to make everybody afraid and just do what this person says. And then you get the question of Wolf again. So I feel like Wolf is, to me, it makes intuitive sense. But again, you could say, well, even if this, so Frankfurt bites the bullet as well. Frankfurt says, well, even if this evil dictator, has no idea how to is not doing things for the right reasons, then still this person, if this person is like fully endorses this end or this intention, then this person is self-determined. So in this view, you could go either way, and I'm not completely sure which way I would go, but I think one of the strengths would be that what I was saying, that if a dictator would say, oh, I want my people to be happy, then you could genuinely say, well, you're making a mistake. You're not doing the right things to make your people happy. And so I think that would be a separate advantage of the view.
Yeah, I think Aku is next and then Hans.
Thanks. I'd like to continue on what Ryan said on the manipulation issue. You already explained how the response might go. So let's say that I'm really worried about this manipulation issue. So one thing that I might say is something like this. What's really the problem with these manipulation scenarios is not my connection to reality, but the problem is that I exert no diachronic control over my desires or something like that, or my intentions. So the problem is not really the connection with reality, but my lack of control in the long term. And that leads me to another way of framing self-determination. So someone might say, well, perhaps self-determination is something that we do in the long run, so to speak. So we have, this would be an extension of the Frankfurtian view. Would be to say something like this. So we have all these desires, we have all these emotions, attitudes, and so on and so on. The more self-determined I am depends on how much I control those in the long term. This seems to be, at least to me, a rather intuitive way of seeing self-determination. So I might not be able to control all my desires now, but the more self-determined I am, in the long term, the more I'm able to exert control over my desires. So my desires will fall in line with my higher values, or my attitudes will become more consolidated in the long run. And this would be a kind of control that I exercise over a long period of time. And this, I think, connects quite well with the idea of virtues too. So you develop virtues by developing certain attitudes and developing your wisdom and the ability to control your psychological features, and not just psychological features, but your environment as well. So I'm just wondering how this is related to the picture of self-determination that you're painting here, because I guess my intuition would be that I would like self-determination to be even a bit more what you're saying. So it's not just being connected to reality, but to be able to control oneself in the long term. So in that sense, determine one's inclinations and attitudes and behavioral patterns. That's a pretty high view of self-control, I think, but self-determination. But it seems like a plausible, that would be a good. Let's put it that way. It would be good if we had something like that.
Yeah, so I would argue that it's instrumental to this view, to be honest. So I would say if you care about friendship, then you have to be constant overall, right? So you have to maintain your friendships and do things that support, well, you living the good life with good friends. And I think one of the reasons that I really don't want to connect it to like specific psychological processes, and I think that's pretty fundamental to my view, is that sometimes desires support your ends and sometimes they don't. And sometimes the situation asks you to do something completely different that's not that doesn't have anything to do with the long run, because they support what you think the good life is. So I do think that, of course, like continuity and being able to suppress certain inclinations and certain desires is important in order to live the good life according to your ends. but I also think that sometimes, for example, if you find it important that children don't drown and you see a child drowning, you should jump into the water immediately, right? So you should act immediately in line with your desires. So what I kind of try to do is to not connect it to like the specific psychological mechanisms that might play a role. Because I think in the end, like all these mechanisms should be, in relation to a virtue approach, all these mechanisms, also your habits, should be in line with what you think the good life is. And you shouldn't just suppress your habits and always act for your deliberate conclusions. So that would be, that would be my response to this proposal.
So the diachronic self-control would be a part of your picture.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, so I kind of visualize it as, I have these, I think this is the good life and I have these ends. And in order to act for these ends, I should at certain points in my life do certain things. So if I care about my friendship with a certain friend, then I should ask her how a certain exam went, and I should call her or send her messages regularly or something like that. So it requires, I cannot just like have one nice day with a person and then not contact this person at all in order for me to live a good life with good friendships.
Yes, so I'm up, I guess. This might have been touched on the last question. I was doing lots of things at once, but sorry if I missed it. But like acting you need to take into account the world, outside world. Yeah, that seems right. All action seems to do that. But there's also this aspect of you want to change the world with actions, at least most of them. You want to build towards another world, especially if you're striving towards the good life, you want to make certain changes. If you see the child drowning, you want to make sure that it doesn't drown, that something changes to this drowning state of affairs. This may not hold for some actions, I was thinking, like effortless action, wu-wei, these kind of things where you just go with the flow. Then you're just taking the world as it is and letting it come over you. But in other cases, it seems to be an essential feature of many actions, something that needs to be there for many meaningful actions. I was wondering what your thoughts are on that.
That's so I would say that's reflected in the end, right? So the end is not having a child drowned, and in order for that to occur, I have to respond to the information accurately. So I have to know where the child is. I have to know whether maybe there's like how do you call it, like one of those round things you can throw in the water or something like that. So you have to take into account the facts in order to be able to act for your ends, right? And also to determine what your end should be, because if I'm just walking past the ocean and there's no child drowning, then I don't have the end to save a drowning child either. So
Yes, but there's also like certain idea maybe in your head of a different kind of world where a certain ideal is achieved or a certain good is realized, and it's not really present or not really part of the world as we find it, as we see it. So I think it should be something mental involved, some idea, some ideal perhaps, maybe some emotions, but I'm not sure about that.
That would be the end on this picture. And I think that's one of the I think this view also integrates rationality with emotions, because like our ends, we don't select them like out of the blue. We select them because they are part of the good life. And then immediately I think emotions and ideas about the good life come in. And then the idea would be that on the basis of this end, which is of course mental, so that it's kind of in Enscombe's view, it's kind of the idea that the action is the physical representation or the other side of the coin of the practical knowledge. And then of course there's something mental as well, but you start from an end and then you have to respond to the environment in order to reach it. But I don't think that the end yeah, I mean, it has to do with what you find desirable and what you think the good life is. And then you can connect it to more ethical questions as well. But in first instance, there has to be an emotional component as well, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, I will also like to ask something. In the context of research in psychology, Lieke, how will you how can we use how could we use self-determination as a concept and ultimately trying to measure it maybe and can we make differentiations between motivational goals or attitudes, for example, in order to predict behavior, for example, if we want to use it to see if we have personal growth, and let's say we are relating it to psychological well-being, personal growth. So how a concept like this that is fuzzy as we are seeing right now, but how could be helpful? Because I think it's different in the way that it is a force. It is something that is making you move, in this case, towards your goals, and it should be linked to yourself. So in this case, obviously, self-awareness, I think, plays a main role. First, you need to know, like, what are your beliefs, your desires truly, and not just the one imposed by society, for example. I don't know, that connection is complex, but first is a force connected to the self. So in which way we could use it in psychological research to have an extra regarding attitudes or motivation? How could we use it?
Yeah, so it's a huge question, Gina. But yeah. So what I think, so one of the reasons I also argue for this view is that, like, if you connect this to free will and more responsibility, I think it's often underestimated, like, that the absence of opportunities is like making people less responsible for what they do. So someone gives this example of like a woman living in a country where there's like no child support, and where the man earns a lot more money if he would keep working and she doesn't. So she has a lot of like reasons or incentives to stay at home with the child, and this is all kinds of inequality consequences, like she will be more independent or more dependent on her husband, for example. And I think if we talk about self-determination and free will and more responsibility, you have to take these contexts into account. So you have to say, well, this woman has less of an opportunity, or is like the world is making it complicated for her to flourish, to self-determine, to live a life that she wants to live, because there are all these forces that make it difficult for her to do a job that she wants to do, instead of stay at home full time with the child, for example. So that's really one of the like background motivations of this point as well, that we have to recognize that self-determination and flourishing are not just internal processes, but you also need a certain kind of world to be able to flourish and to self-determine your life. So I think that would be, ideally, that would have to be part of making sense of what personality growth is, and also to facilitate personality growth. So I would say, if you really care about everybody being able to grow and being able to develop themselves, then you would also have to create the circumstances in which people can develop and grow. So I think that would be an important point. And in relation to that, I also think that maybe the self shouldn't be as much of an internal thing either. So I think the kind of person you are and the kind of person you can be also depends on the circumstances. So I'm a different person when I'm in different circumstances, and I also want different things, and certain things are rational to want, for example, depending on what the world is like. So I think that also always depends on an interplay between the world in which you live and so I don't think that we are born with certain desires and then we fight against this world in which like this might not even work out. It always develops in like the kind of things you're offered, for example, and the things you learn, and the possibilities for action that people offer you. So yeah, so concretely for measuring, then I would think, yeah, we should take into account these things as well. But I think it's extremely difficult, because you could also say that if I say, oh, this woman who's staying at home full time with her children, this might also be a personal autonomous choice, right? I shouldn't be the one saying, oh, you're not flourishing or you're not growing because you're staying at home with the children. This can be, but then again, you can also say, well, this is the result of growing up in a certain society where it's normal for women to take more care of their children compared to men. So it brings in a lot of very difficult issues, I think, because if you would develop like a general questionnaire and you would ask women how many hours do you stay at home with the children, or how many hours do you spend doing household chores, for example, you're already and you're judging that as a measure of personality growth, you're already presupposing that they shouldn't be doing that. And I think that's very difficult to, I mean, who am I to tell another person what to do? So it makes things more complicated, but I would think it's good to take into account in questionnaires at least something like what's like the possibilities you have for flourishing, and what are the kinds of obstacles you face and things like that. So in general, my approach is to make all these things more relational instead of just internal.
Yeah, to provide a context. Yeah, thank you. It was helpful. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, good.
Okay, so I think we have Aku once again. Aku?
I mean, there's no one else I can go, but if someone else wants to ask something.
No, go Aku. Yeah.
Okay, so building on what was just said, I'd like to expand a little bit on the social nature of reasons, because this seems to be quite a central thing. This is again one of these points that von Wright makes, that most of the reasons that we get from other people. So it's not like we somehow generate reasons in our head or something like that. No, reasons are a part of the social world in which we live, and the values that we have, and the reasons for acting on the basis of those values and beliefs, they mostly come from other people. So this constant interaction between people and ourselves seems to be the place where reasons come up, and this is the very reason why von Wright says that reasons are a part not of the psychological world of the individual, but the social world. So they're not. So in the psychological world, you have all sorts of causes and mechanisms and things like that. But reasons are denizens, are citizens of this shared social and cultural world, the world of language, and so on and so on. So I was wondering whether you could say a little bit more about how, on your view, the social aspects of reasons happens. Or...
Yeah, so I definitely think that, I think I completely agree with this. And I think, so I really like Ian Hacking's work as well on this idea of like being able to be a certain human being, for example, or to have certain possibilities, like being able to act under certain descriptions. I think all these things are social, right? So, there's always like being, I don't know, being a philosopher is like, has all these social aspects. I cannot just decide for myself that I'm being a philosopher, for example, when I'm doing something. So, and I also think that if your environment offers less possibilities for certain ends that we do think are valuable, then it is a problem for your possibility to self-determine and to flourish. So I find that really that's also a really interesting discussion, like with the free will debate as well. On the one hand, you have people, compatibilists, of course, saying that it only matters if you're able to do the right thing or the thing that you really want to do, and you don't need alternative possibilities. If you if you can just do whatever you want. And then on the other hand, of course, you have people who say that alternative possibilities are more important. But then, of course, I would think that these have to be valuable in some way. And I tend to think that these two interact in a very interesting way as well. Because if you're like fully compatibilist, then you would say, well, it only matters that I can just do what I really want to do. Then you have to be really lucky from a young age onwards that you have like that you learn about the right ends instead of being able to explore and try different things and having like family members who have different kinds of jobs and live different kinds of lives. So yeah, I would say that there's an interesting interaction, but at least, of course, you need to be offered certain views of what a good life could be, and instead of just one. And you cannot just make them up. You learn it from other people, I would think. Yeah. You also put something in the chat, right?
Yes, I'm not familiar with Michael Thompson's work, so could you put on some links?
That's his book, Life and Action. In that book, so he starts with life, and then there's a part 2, and then part 3 is action, I think. And so it's just life and action.
Yeah, so I don't think we have another question. So if you all agree, I think we can leave it here and continue to enjoy our weekend and also our holidays, right? Our summer break, it's starting. So see you all, except Lieke, on August. Thank you very much, Lieke. It was really interesting. And thank you, everyone, for being here.
Thank you very much for your questions. Really interesting.
Thank you.